Awesome. Thank you so much for joining another Lunch and Learn. My name is Sarah Paxton. I'm the Community and Events Marketing Manager at Optimal Workshop. And I'm so glad that everyone could join us for this session. I know it's not lunchtime for everyone, but to have everyone here to dedicate some time is always so special. I've shared some helpful links in the chat, and I'll share them again at the end of the session, but please feel free to click on any of those or message me if you have any questions. Yeah, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our lovely speaker, Torrey, to introduce herself and share her screen, and we'll just jump right into it. Torrey, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you for having me. Apologies for my squeaky-ish voice. It is springtime where I am in Seattle, Washington, outside of Seattle, and the pollen is killing me, but not actually all the way to dead, so we're good. I am here to talk about some research I did about content design skills worldwide, specifically among content designers, although I know people who do a lot of content design, regardless of their title, also participated. So let me get into it and introduce myself. I'm Torrey Podmajersky. I'm the president of Catbird Content. I built teams for content design and UX content in general at Microsoft, OfferUp, and Google. I was the first content professional for multiple teams at those. And I served business audiences, consumer audiences, technical audiences for topics like gaming, privacy, account and identity, marketplace, education, cloud enablement, advertising, and a little bit more. So now I do content design consulting, and I speak and teach and mentor folks worldwide. And with that, I had a question. What are content design skills, and why do companies hire us to use them? I actually got to come to UX New Zealand 5 years ago after my first book was published, Strategic Writing for UX. And at the time, content design or UX writing was new enough that a lot of people, like I even had a technical reviewer for the book say, this isn't a real job. And here 5 years later, there's tens of thousands of people doing this job. But these past several months have been really rough in UX with layoffs. Corporate wealth has been increasing, but companies have been decreasing their spend on employees and agencies like mine. So I had this question: why do companies hire, support, and promote content designers? After talking not only with people in content, but also with people in agile and product management and elsewhere in design. And I'm pretty sure, I think it's because we make the money. Content designers have skills that make real improvements in companies' products, real differences to their finances, and more. But what are those skills, and what are those improvements we make? And how can we connect them to talk about the impact that our skills can make? So with those questions, it was time for some research. First, I'll be telling you how this was set up, how I designed the research and conducted it. Then I'll tell you about some of the headline results. So first, I gathered these lists of skills, and I went from the CX skills audit, different self-evaluations that were available, job descriptions that are made publicly available, suggestions from conference attendees, secondary, I spread a wide net. Who's talking about these skills and how can I gather them together? And then I put together an initial survey, and I tested it with 83 participants. And what I did is I waited until I had at least a couple of participants from every geopolitical region and every level of tenure, that is years of experience, to get as many viewpoints as I could. And it took about 23 hours just to get this initial set of volunteers. So then I went through that data, and there were some obvious problems already. So I interviewed them and said, mostly I listened to what to see what they wanted out of this survey and out of knowing these results. Like, what can we make sure that we're covering in this survey and in this research project? And ahead of those interviews, I sent them a report about their results as compared to their peers, just in the context of this 83-person group. From my initial analysis, I could tell there were big problems with the skill scale. So I refined that iteratively as I talked with the interviewees. And I set these up very scrappily, like just Google Meet and emails, and just the conversation was the important part. So having done the research and the refinement, here is my final survey design. Several demographic questions about region and tenure and training, prior careers, what kind of environment hires them, what languages they use, etc. Also, the initial skills list was like 82 skills. Some of those had to be combined together. Others of them were new skills were added. But the list of 94 skills was in there, and I named them all descriptively. Actually, I had, since this is with content people, I had a lot of questions about this from, especially from senior content practitioners saying, oh, but you should have named them in a structured way so that everybody could tell that this skill relates to this category of skills and does this thing. I said, nah, what I need here is for people to approach each skill a little bit differently and say, have I done that? Am I comfortable with that? So naming them descriptively got closer to that. We'll look at the updated skill scale in a moment. Tried to keep it simple, but my research brethren were like, but you're putting aware of on one side and comfortable with in another. And we went back and forth quite a bit and said, actually, this maps to how people learn things. So it's the right scale for learning. Our language just doesn't put good endpoints on that. I did ask people how they felt their skill leveled before they looked at all the skills and after, and then requested feedback at the end. So let's get into, we've talked about the how and the why the research was set up. Let's get into who responded. Since I stopped and did this analysis, there's been many more people responding. I think another 100 people have responded, but this data is all about these 927. And people could multi-select these regions. And you'll notice that the regions cross, well, let me get into that in a moment. So first of all, not a shock, mostly the people that I reached to volunteer for this survey were in the Europe and North American economic region. These are the people with the greatest access to my book, with the exception of Brazil, who is also more represented than most of the rest of Latin America and the Caribbean. The criticism of the regions is super fair. I was looking for a relatively politically neutral way for people to describe where they came from or the various places they came from. And even though this lumps together many, many diverse countries, it does accurately reflect that this is a survey of folks in the economically similar Europe and North American regions. It also mostly represents people in English. The survey was only available in English, and most of the people I reach are speakers of English. So the vast majority of us designed in English, so 96%. Only 20% of us design in more than one language, even if we speak or use more languages than that. And only 4% of respondents here don't design in English at all. So that is a big thing to know about this data, is that it's about people in Europe and North America who design and speak English. People could multi-select these as well. Now, what kind of organizations do content designers work within? People could multi-select here too. Enterprise companies is the biggest bar. By their nature, they've hired a lot of us. About a third of us have experienced freelance, startup, and small company. The divvying up between those three is pretty even. Even when I go a level deeper and say, how many multi-selected more than one of these, et cetera. Agencies are more rare than any of these. So my sense is that they've been slower to adopt content design as a separate discipline, which makes sense, given the nature of how agencies work. Government and nonprofit are about the same level, and they have smaller hiring budgets than anybody, and they have more people in design wearing multiple hats. So this also makes sense to me. This is still most representative of Europe and North America and English first workplaces. I also asked about where they sit within the organization. And it's fascinating to me because it's been a real struggle in the growth of the content design discipline. So where should we report and where makes sense? Well, most of us have worked as part of a design team, but more than half have also or otherwise been part of the product team directly, which is kind of a great thing. It means that not only does design see the value, but product is directly seeing the value and funding it. About a fifth have done content design from the technical writing team, which in my opinion is one of the hardest splits to do out there. Because while you're working in content in both cases, you're working in content for vastly different purposes. And about 9% have worked directly from the engineering team, which is one of the best places to work because the developers, in my experience, really appreciate the content design resources, but they can't necessarily support you in your creative design career. So another thing, about half of us have marketing experience. So you kind of roll your dice. Do we make our partners guess which half of us have marketing experience? Many also have journalism or content strategy experience, technical writing. Many of us come from content careers. The top 80% of respondents' prior careers involve content work. So we come from this wide variety of careers, and the vast majority of them involve communication, content, or design in some way. This set right here is through the top 20%. I'm sorry, is the top 80% of prior skills. Another interesting part about how we work is some of us work solo and some don't. More of us have worked solo than have worked in a team with other content designers. So think about that. You are more likely to have worked with a solo content designer than a content designer as part of a larger team, even though so many people have worked within enterprise at enterprise level. And that is very familiar to me, having worked as a solo operative within large corporations, very large corporations. So what this means to me is that it's normal to be on your own as a solo content designer. And for a lot of us, that's just part of the job. It means that the weight is on the content designer to be on top of their development, seeking and securing support, sponsorship, growth opportunities. And content designers should point this out to their leadership and get leadership to pony up for the mentorship and coaching and workshops and et cetera, conferences, contractor spend when they're overstretched. Also, I think it's important. I started by mentioning that in 2019, this was still very new, and it's much less new now, especially as people have recognized, oh, that's called a thing now? I've been doing that for years. I didn't know it was called a thing. So our data here, I asked people in these 5 10-year bands, like they haven't done any content design yet. They've been doing it for less than a year, 1 to 3 years, 4 to 8 years, or 8+ years. And 8+ is a huge range, right? And the ranges get bigger here, mostly because I was interested in skill acquisition and skill development over time. And as people grow in their career, you gather fewer skills, right? Because you've got your arsenal already. A lot of so a limit of this research is that due to its volunteer survey nature, the overall data is weighted toward folks with more than 4 years of experience. This may be affected by low hiring in the past year, by layoffs, and by my own reach in seeking volunteers. Um, this isn't a shock, considering my book came out 5 years ago. And I was joking that the last time I talked about this publicly, I was joking that if my publisher sees this, they're going to want a new edition. And sure enough, I'm in talks with them about a new edition, which is great. Okay, so let's talk about the skill rating results. And we're not going to get into all 94 skills. Don't worry, that would be terribly boring. We're just going to look at the top line results and what we can take away from them. So the skill we used is the same skill that was in our poll this morning. For any given skill, are you not aware of the skill? Are you aware of it, but you couldn't say that you have some training in it? Have you had some training, but you haven't used it yet? And then the distance between 4 and 5 was the toughest part to design here, but have done in at least one context versus comfortable doing in most contexts is there's just a vast difference there in terms of, oh, could you go to a part of your company working on a product that you've never even seen before and start digging in and doing this skill with them? Okay. Could you translate from consumer facing to technical facing? So that's the kind of context switch we're looking for. I also included in the survey instructions about the scale and video instructions about using the scale. So in terms of results, big relief that the top highest scored skills were some of the corest to content design, right? The writing UX content to maximize usability. People were happy they could do that. They could also edit it for accuracy, edit it to a style guide, critique design work, and use controlled terminology and a controlled vocabulary to get that right. If you hear somebody talking in the background, that's probably my cat. If he comes over, I'll make sure he makes an appearance. Okay, our lowest scored skills were mostly about large language models. And this is not a huge surprise. This is totally fine. Most content designers haven't had a chance to do more than play with LLMs on the side, not integrating it into their workflow yet. But content folks have unique skills to make large language models work. And they are big bets across the industry right now. So we have a lot of potential upside here, whether it's designing that LLM persona and style, documenting the APIs so the LLMs can be used appropriately, writing content to train the LLMs that you know to be factual and accurate and in the right voice. All of these are critical. I found very interesting that one of the most important things you do when you want an LLM to actually go live is you train it with responses to combative prompts. So people will try to make your LLM do terrible things. So how are you going to train your LLM to respond to those appropriately in a brand appropriate way, in an accessible way, in a usable way? One of the critical things that content design is starting to do now. So aside from LLMs, we have room to grow elsewhere too. So these are what I call the low dependency skills, or among the low dependency skills. Like I can model some content without anybody's permission or any special equipment. I can also make how-to videos or structure content for reuse. I can do a lot of those things with less dependency than, say, designing combative prompt responses. These are just things we need to do. And for the most part, on average, respondents are ready to do that work that's been most available to us. So these are the lowest of those low dependency skills. But what's also interesting is how different groups learn. And actually, this survey doesn't get to how they learn, but it gets to an approximation of that by being able to split by tenure. So if I look from 0 years and less than 1 year as like early career folks to 1 to 3 years, what are the biggest differences in their average responses to the skills? And these were the biggest difference. These beginners became practitioners of some of our most important work within the first couple of years. And that is things like collaborating with engineering, um, annotating the UX content and designs to make that communication and design development happen. Critiquing design work, people went from nothing to competent. Also writing these legal and privacy disclosures, using controlled vocabularies, those kinds of things had these massive, more than a level bump, more than a level change. For mid-career to more senior career, from mid to later, we see differences in a population. We see a population difference, right? Because here are people who have started in this 1 to 3 years ago versus people who have been in it for quite a while longer. So this isn't so much a linear progression of what these people have learned, but also a reflection of what people learned to do in times past, in ye olden days of 6 years ago. So contributing to those taxonomies, planning to adopt new platforms or CMSs to control and manage data content, using content management systems at all, reviewing content in code, like having that technical expertise. So these biggest differences in skill sets is in the use of content specific tooling, which is not terribly surprising. I think what's interesting is that we don't see that jump from the 1 to 3 to 4 to 8, but in the 4 to 8 to 8+ is where we see managing people take a big leap. And these leaps are getting smaller too. So it's the 0.6 of a tick between them, not the full point. Mapping ecosystems. Coding shows up again here, but I think that that's more of a population difference. So the biggest difference in skill sets here is in leadership and strategy tools, looking at things systemically. So those are the biggest high level things. And I want to make sure I point out, this doesn't mean that every content designer should have all 94 skills, or it would even be possible for them to do that in the course of a single, even somewhat irrational career. There's just so much ground to cover in these 94 skills. So my answer is no. It's not even a great goal to do all of those skills. Content designers are not in charge of the business strategy. What we can do as content designers and as any kind of designer is to use our skills to help our organization meet that strategy. For some of them, we need opportunities, the right job, the right moment at the job, the right technology of that moment to even get the chance to develop some of these skills. And with all of these skills, any of them, we still can make differences for the company, for the product, and for the users of those products. Because like I said at the beginning, we're here to work to make the impact. This is not a completionist sport. We need to use the right tools and the right skills to make the maximum impact. So this is the other side of that question that I posed at the beginning. What are the skills to make the impacts? So let's talk about those categories of impact, which I'm going to tie back to how survey respondents ranked their own skills. So when I started thinking about impacts for different skills, I started very granularly. I examined each skill, why it makes sense to use that skill, and the impact I've seen it make or expect it to make. And that's visible even in the very first list of skills I started at a conference, where there's a column for why the skill is useful to the business. That granular process was super messy and it was hard to make sense of. So I did more research into business planning and strategy, looking at what kinds of categories of business impact are used in that field. So using that, I refined my list into 30 different kinds of impact that these content design skills make, grouped into these 6 categories. Enhancer impact, that like you do this and it makes everything better. Financial impact, obviously. Product impacts, productivity, like how people work together. Regulatory impacts, like whether that's saving the planet or just avoiding liability, and user impacts, improving users' understanding and confidence and outcomes. I have a cat who is thinking about making an appearance, but it looks like he's going to settle into his box. This is a good outcome for now. We'll see if he'll make an appearance later. So we have these categories of impact. And for each skill then, so this is, again, the writing UX content to maximize usability. I've gone deeper into my own experience, and part of that is describing the key impacts that could be made with each of the skills. For example, these are the impacts among those 30 impacts for writing UX content to maximize usability, whether it's expanding the potential audience, increasing customer confidence, etc. For the other top threes here, editing content for accuracy. Well, when it's accurate, your support costs go down. Your internal team becomes more aligned, because sometimes writing it in the UX is the very first time an idea gets articulated in writing, and people go, "Oh, is that what that meant? I didn't know that meant that. Maybe we should change that." It also reduces liability, especially in financial technology, in any regulated industry, finance, healthcare, advertising, any of those. You want that incredibly accurate so that you can defend it if you're called by, say, the regulators of Germany to account for this. And there's just making it good for the users, improving those outcomes. Similarly, editing to a style guide increases the consistency of experience. It increases the perception of quality, which is pretty critical to regulators. They will look at, is this a high quality thing? Well, then maybe we don't need as much scrutiny on all of the different parts. It builds a sense of trust, and it increases customer confidence directly. So if we're thinking about all of those impacts and tying that to the scale, I'm making this bold statement. Here's how I understand impact and skill usage. At the beginning of a scale, if someone's not aware of a skill, they can't make impact with it. If they're aware of it but don't know how to use it yet, I can't make impact with it, really. If I've had training in it but haven't used it, well, I can't make impact with it unless I'm using it. But as soon as I start using that skill, it's possible I can make all of its impact. That doesn't mean that I wouldn't do it differently, with more upside, more efficiency, less stress, lower cost, when more experienced with it. But it does mean that somebody using the skill shouldn't be afraid to know and claim the impacts they can make with it. So let's look at those impacts. When I look at how people responded, so the scale going up is how people responded to these by category. The yellow bar is between about 3.1 to 5 on the graph. And across all categories, potential impact tends to grow with experience. When I presented this to content designers, I was all like, people with 0 years, do not worry. You're not expected to make impact with every skill while you're new, right? Also, these are the averages and not individual skills. This doesn't mean that none of your skills will make these impacts or make impacts in these categories. So respondents with more tenure are more ready to make impact. And no tenure group has had opportunity to gain comfort with all of the skills. So looking at these individually, these enhancer skills, these are mostly what we call soft skills. And these are generalist skills. They make everything better. And content designers tend to come into those roles, even with 0 years of experience in content design, already competent with these things, already to make impact with their enhancer skills. And we make money and we save money. While we can make all of these impact, we rank our skills highest. These are all financial impacts. We rank our financial impacts highest. Sorry, we rank our skills that align to financial impacts highest when they are about reducing support operations costs. So they include editing for accuracy, monitoring performance metrics, even bug bashing, contributing to taxonomies, and several more skills. If we are avoiding LLMs, that is where, this is why this is a little bit low. People were ranking their abilities lower in LLMs. We can help reduce risk to brand perception for companies using LLMs with our skills in language by advocating for updates to the design system to include LLMs, by designing responses for those combative props that I talked about before, for writing the content to train them. These are all those are all about the quality and about the reducing that risk to the brand perception, which has a big impact on product. So team alignment. This was not a huge surprise. I've heard hundreds of times over the last several years that just having a content person on the team helps the whole team work better. And what was interesting is that that's reflected in this data. 31 of our content design skills contribute to enabling internal team and alignment, including enabling non-specialists to create design artifacts. Because in general, we have one or a few, maybe a couple of content designers to entire staffed design teams. So if these content designers are helping by creating content design system, creating UI by building on the previous designs so that they can take the lead there in those designs, driving adoption for self-service content tools, all of those things helps there. Now, quality perception, including LLMs, we can be, this is different than the brand risk. This is just sort of the flip side of it. Like the risk is the floor and the quality perception is the ceiling. Our highs here were in skills that can reduce the carbon footprint of content directly, and increasing the quality perception includes so many of the LLM skills that that's why it's a little bit low here. Now, talking about user impacts, this is the last of the impact categories. I am super not worried at all about content designers designing for users. According to the results reported, people who've been doing this for work for even less than a year are doing the work of making experiences work better for humans. Now, when it came to the, I create from this also personal reports that survey takers can get. And in those personal reports, people find out for which are their top skills as compared to their tenure group. So the skills that they are better at than their peers on average report being. So these are their differentiators. And also, which skills do they say they're not as confident with or not as comfortable with that would make a big impact? And so these are the skills that in those reports I recommend for impact. And the top 3 are about research, monitoring metrics in an ongoing way, which is another kind of research, and storytelling, making sure that we can tell the story of those brands. So you'll see that these are still pretty low percentages in terms of who gets or how many times they were recommended, because these are very personal to what that person has already reported. But if I had to take top 3 away, it would be researching, monitoring metrics, and storytelling. And the impacts for those just get longer and longer. So impacts for researching language is reducing time, extracting insights, reducing liability. When we get into monitoring content performance metrics, we can have financial impacts, product impacts. We can reduce that carbon footprint. We can improve user outcomes. And storytelling is not only an enhancer because it makes it easier to do any of the other skills, many of the other skills. We're reducing that time to develop and design and aligning the team, increasing adoption and user understanding. So that's all really cool. And a lot of this came out of, so let me wrap up my own storytelling here. Here's a totally different slide. The whole idea behind mapping skills to impacts, to business impacts, came in a roundabout way from conversations I had with Michael and Winslow. And they are agile coaches. And they had been saying, they had been at their own conference, and I heard from each of them later, like, we talked about how cool it would be to have like a pairing menu for agile concepts to the kinds of problems that they solve. Wouldn't that be cool? And I said, yeah, it would. And I want that for content design. And I want to be able to say, hey, for UX content, do data analysis to inform your strategy, to increase organic traffic, do accessibility to expand that potential audience base, do taxonomies to align your internal team, etc. And so, yeah, so it came, that's where a lot of this research and that initial question came from. Because I want content design to keep being this vibrant career path with designers and strategists and consultants like me getting paid to meet business goals and help users have better experiences. And to do that, we need to grow design leaders' understanding of what content designers do and what we can accomplish for their teams and their business. And I need to position my own company as a thought leader in all of that. Most people doing design of any kind don't want to run a small business on the side. We want jobs working inside teams and making a difference. And so I try to help from the outside. Yeah, so that is me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tori. I've got a question, but I'm gonna kind of open it up a little bit and see if anyone wants to either raise their hand or type something in the chat. And so I'll ask my question as people kind of think if they're ready or brave enough to ask their own. Where do you think the future of UX content writing is going? You kind of mentioned at the beginning that, people are struggling with potential like job losses and cuts and things like that. Where do you kind of see, what has your research kind of inferred? Where do you kind of see the industry going?
Yeah, I see it. I see a lot of rebound happening. Hiring is definitely picked up again. And I think that AI will be part of the picture. LLMs will be part of the picture. And I think that a huge amount of content writing jobs are about to explode in that area, because an enormous amount of the content that AIs are being trained on right now, LLMs are being trained on right now, is unstructured, especially content at these enormous corporations. It's unstructured, so the AI doesn't know how to exclude things from the content set. And training it is super hard. So this is all about language, and there are language experts all around.
I've got one follow-up question, and then I just want to prepare you that my favorite question that popped up in the chat is from Dan, and it's show us that cat. So
yeah,
that's coming.
That.
Okay, cool. Yeah, with AI, I think that the impact has the potential to be hugely positive in this industry, like for content practitioners to like edit and refine, but it gives like a nice baseline. Where do you like, I'm not a content person. Am I wrong in my assumptions? Like, how do you feel AI will impact it, and how might we mitigate some of those issues?
Yeah. I think that it's going to do a lot to democratize adequate content, much the same way that Microsoft Word and WordStar and antique word processing programs democratized publishing, and especially small publishing. But it didn't make everybody capable of writing for audiences of millions or billions. And the one of the things that you can count on from AI, the way it is trained and maintained and the way the models have been developed, is that it will create adequate mediocrity. So if you need to be slightly better than mediocre, if you need it to be better than adequate, that's when to involve somebody who's actually a specialist with it.
Fair.
Yeah.
We have had a question pop up from Amber in the chat that says, where should a singular content designer for a large organization focus their time most? And I think that probably
Yeah.
has to do with that impact that you were talking about, and potentially, like I'm inferring, and Amber, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but proving your value in some of those regards.
Yeah. So a lot of that is going to depends on many things, but it depends on really predictable things. Why was the role created? Because no single content design role was created just because, like, hey, we should have one of those. That's great. Or at least extremely few of those are. So I'm going to assume that that wasn't the point of the question. So it's going to depend on why it was hired, and that'll be a combination of politics internal to the company, and not politics like a dirty word, but just what are the relationships and the processes and the operations and the priorities within the people operations going on. And then also, what are the business goals and the user goals for that product or for that product suite that you're working on? And so it is the topic of, I mean, I think it should be the topic of that solo content designer's conversations with their boss and their skip level and their partners, and probably quarterly. Am I working on the right things? Here's what I think we should be working on. Here's what we should be driving towards. I think it will have these impacts.
No, I agree, because I feel like especially in this kind of climate, business objectives are changing, and
Mhm.
sometimes faster than maybe the company has been used to in the past. So having those check-ins is extremely valuable.
Yeah.
Um, Antonia has a question about storytelling, and it says, what are your thoughts or tips for those wanting to either develop or enhance the skill of storytelling?
Yeah. I think it also depends on where you're coming from. Like, are you super new at it? Are you and what is the appetite for storytelling around you? Because that can look very, very different. In general, telling people, uh, being the person at the beginning of the meeting, like if your meetings generally kick off and people know what they're working on and everybody jumps in right away and you work on a few things, maybe you even have great notes afterwards, maybe everybody knows what they're doing. Great. But if somebody says in one sentence at the beginning, hey, so we're working on this, and the top problem we're trying to solve is this thing, and I think we can get there because we are doing it this way, and the problem we're working on today is this. Nobody minds that, and people love it. I've seen actually a group in which this wasn't happening. I was not doing it, including me. And somebody came in, a designer actually came in new to the group and just started doing this. And everybody's like, I know why I'm here. I know what we're doing. I'm always grounded in the story of why this exists at all. And when questions come up later, and they always do, about what should we prioritize in the information architecture on the screen, or should this piece of information be in a subheading or in the title, when those questions come up, everybody is grounded in the same place. So there's that kind of very lightweight storytelling. Also, there's storytelling like, how can I tell myself why we're doing this? Like, I'm presenting at a design review. I'm going to start with, actually, I reference the Pixar story format a lot because it's, hey, every day this has been happening. And then one day we came across this opportunity, and then this problem came up, and then this problem came up, and then this problem came up, and here's our solution. And then everybody knows why we're there. And I can say the kind of feedback that would be super helpful is. So I hope that helps. Oh, wait, you're muted.
Thank you so much. I think it really did help. I'm going to skip to the next question and then follow up with her secondary one so everyone gets a chance to have a question answered. So we'll jump down to Rachel. What would you recommend design students concentrate on if they want to learn content design?
Yeah, I usually start people with usability, by which I mean very specifically clarity, conversationality, like not as a tone of voice, but as a like using Grace's maxims of here's what respectful communication looks like in a conversation, purposefulness, accessibility in the language itself, not just accessibility, not the broader accessibility, but using accessible language. What did I talk about? Clarity. Oh, and concision, keeping it short. And that is all in my book. Not to show my book, but being able to go through those as heuristics. I start with that usability set and then go into voice, because you also want your product to be speaking with its own voice. And by that, I mean reflecting its product principles everywhere so that it's recognizably that product instead of the product just looking like all the other products that do that thing. I hope that helped.
Yes, I've just popped in a link for your book if anyone's interested in perusing. We'll jump back to probably our last question, which is a follow-up question to developing LLM content related skills. Any thoughts on how best to approach a LLM focused web/content project for the first time with context of a rapidly evolving developments in AI today? It's also typed out if you want to refer to it.
Yeah, it is with great patience and fortitude. Yeah, I left Google last July, so not quite a year ago. And my team was deeply involved in using AI and LLM technologies in brand new ways. And that literally the technology and the research shifted not even every week, it was more like every 4 to 5 days. So we practiced a lot of, I'm going to be a little bit flippant. We practiced a lot of self-care, and that is both the truth and we did it in really practical ways, like continuing. This is where we really leveraged our storytelling muscles too. And everything we produced, everything my team produced, I tried to be a cheerleader for. Great. What is your artifact that shows what you did and how it contributed and what problem you thought you were solving that week or that moment? And then even if that whole solution and that problem evaporate, there is still artifacts to go and be like, because it's very easy to get to a month, at the end of a month in such an environment and be like, I haven't made any progress at all. What is even happening here? We're back at square one. Ah! And what's important is to be able to go back to your work and say, no, we dealt with really hard problems over and over again. I should be this exhausted because we worked this hard. And when we put it together and do a meta-analysis of it, we find out that there are some problems that we are solving over and over again. And we find out something that actually I didn't do, but I encouraged people on my team to do was, after I left, was to make a catalog of problems we've already solved. Just make a list, problems we've already solved, and use that as a link farm to all of these artifacts that you've created. So yeah, remember to breathe.
No, it's hard when you're in the thick of it to see that kind of incremental progress. And I think making a list to refer back to, not only for your own mental health and benefit to see what you've done, but then also for that record keeping, because no one will be at the same job forever, and to kind of have that historical knowledge of what's been going and the decisions made and how it came about is hugely important for the success of your team to continue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Do I need to grab
With
that cat?
I think I was just about to say that
Yes.
as we start winding down.
Let me see that cat.
What Tori, what's the cat's name? Oh,
This is
beautiful
Hawthorne.
coloring.
Yeah, he's very pretty. He knows it. Yeah.
Oh.
What a cutie.
No, yeah. Tori and I were talking earlier, and it's so nice to have these kind of like human elements, like someone's gonna walk by, you're gonna be on mute, the cat's gonna pop up, the baby's gonna cry. That these human elements on these kind of virtual things are always so nice to see. With that, I think we will end it there. Unless you have any final words to say, Tori, I'll stop the recording.
No, thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Awesome.